Okay, hi everybody. Welcome to our second session of the Alter Ego course, or second week, I mean. Hi again. Hi, Cameron, Leke, Julian, Samantha. Hi, Samantha. Hi, Chris and Nolan. Okay, great. Okay, there are three Christophers in this class. I don't know, Christopher. Do I call you Christopher or Chris?
Whatever's easiest for you. I really don't have a preference when it comes to names. Chris is fine.
All right. Okay, hi, Chris. Okay, great. So there are three Christophers in this course. So that's cool. Now, and I'm glad you guys can make it to this time. We have maybe a chance to also make some more introductions. Maybe I don't know if we all. Is there some of you? For some of you, is this the first time in a weekly session?
Yes.
And
Yes.
Chris
Yeah, it's my
and
first as well.
Julian
Mhm.
and Nolan. Okay, how about we just quickly go through and reintroduce all of ourselves. All right, since that way we can sort of start on the same footing. Okay, so maybe Julian, you can start, then Chris, and then Nolan. Did you say you haven't had a chance to introduce yourself either, Nolan?
Yeah, correct.
All right, so let's say Julian, Chris, and Nolan, you guys started, and then the rest of us will come in. Okay, so please, Julian.
Hi. So yes, my name is Julian Marquez. I'm a media arts and sciences student. I'm in my final semester right now, and I just saw this course listed on the class search page, and the name of it, the brief description on it, it seemed to interest me. And like I've already taken some other world building classes as well, and so I figured like this kind of topic about alternate ecologies will also help add on to that as well.
Cool, welcome, great, and Chris.
I'm an informatics student, and I needed an upper division elective, but this class and its description seemed very interesting to me. I've always been someone who's interested in like larger human structures. Like I'm taking an urban grand challenges course, which is all about like the ecological challenges faced by cities where as climate change gets to ramp up. So this class is right up my alley. Even though it's not like exactly in my major, I'm more like a coding person. This is a really interesting class to me.
Perfect. Thanks. Nolan?
Yeah, hi, I'm Nolan. I'm also media arts and sciences. I'm in my last semester as well. And this class will have filled my last upper division elective, and I've never really seen a class with like content like this, so it seemed really unique, and I was really excited to take it.
Okay. Now, if you don't mind repeating, or you also embellish your introductions from last time, let me give the baton to Cameron.
My name is Cameron. I'm kind of in no man's land between undergrad and grad student. Primary interest is in long-term resilience and the criteria for that for human civilization. And so this class is asking quite a lot of similar questions. Yeah, looking forward to today's discussion.
Yeah, we're going to have more to say today, especially this week. Samantha?
Hey guys, I'm Sam. I'm also a media arts and sciences student. I'm a junior, so I'm getting into like the upper divisions of this major, and I really enjoy the lecture-based classes. Like I really loved like prototyping dreams when I was a freshman, so it kind of reminded me of that. But yeah, I'm just really interested in learning more.
Great. Thanks for joining us, Sam. Leke? Gbemileke?
Hey, hi everyone. My name is Gbemileke, or Leke. I am a second year graduate student, media arts and sciences. I'm taking this course because I've taken other courses by Professor Sha, and then taken some other philosophy of media technologies courses, and I really love that they ask questions. And they kind of go deep into motive and reason. And so, yeah, that's why I'm taking this course.
Thank you. And last but not least, Leah.
Hello, I'm Leah. I'm also a second year grad student, but in the School for the Future of Innovation and Society and their program on human and social dimensions of science and technology. So I study technology and society, and my interests are centered around data sovereignty for personal health data. I'm really interested in like grassroots health justice organizing and how control over data can kind of better suit those ends. And somewhere in there interested in future thinking methods and imagining futures and how that all fits into this.
Super. I think we have a great set of students for this course. So this week, well, last week we just opened broke the ice by having people speak up and talk about some examples of infrastructures and what some hallmarks are. I know it's just the beginning. We didn't really come to any conclusive characterization, but I think we'll do that as we go through the course. But this week I wanted to really get in there and think about whys, some of the whys. And in fact, for this week, the questions are taken from this first link. I should share a screen while I'm talking here just to show you what I'm looking at. Okay, from the first link in the readings, this is Jim Bendel's Deep Adaptation. So I hope all of you have had a chance to peek at some of these articles already, but really importantly, the first one, Bendel, because that's what Das is going to ask us, where he asks us to consider some questions that I'd like to take some time today to talk about. We'll get back to that. And then another set of readings that might be interesting there is kind of David Graeber's, this is from David Graeber's book. I know at least a couple of you have read this book. Anybody here in this session look at David Graeber's works from before? He wrote this book called Debt. Oh yeah, great, Cameron. Was it this one that you looked at already, or a different one?
Debt and some of his articles as well.
Yeah. Okay. So he's been a really great inspiration for a lot of people coming from anthropology, and also looking at activism, different kinds of activist politics, looking for different ways that people can organize ourselves in different societies, different forms. And that's what this book is about, The Dawn of Everything. It's his last book. And in there, oh, I already have it linked up, so I don't have to use this version. But anyway, in there, I mean, he writes well, so it's kind of easy to read. So that's a very kind of storytelling way of doing things. But I wanted to just we can go deep into it, where he talks about the different kind of models for societies, and he's poking fun at kind of like armchair type archaeology or anthropology, where you sort of have a high level view of theories of human nature. So he's poking fun at people like Hume and Rousseau for being either too skeptical or too pessimistic or too utopian about how we used to be when we were all hunter-gatherers or before cities and civilization got started. So in the middle of this work, I wanted to draw attention, and we'll talk about that later on here. I think I highlighted it. It gets past the poking fun sections and start looking at particular examples of really existing example societies where people really work in a different way with each other. So I'll stop there. This is about page, oh God, no page marks. Oh, well, anyway, you can see from the slide, from the scroll bar, it's actually near the bottom of the text. Okay, come back to that. So after looking at some examples from David Graeber, and another set of examples, a very different way of thinking about things from the point of view of policy, this is Alan Hoekstra's book on ecology. And there, okay, we talk about these different ways to kind of, from a more policy point of view, try to decide, how to assess what's going on, how to measure what's going on from different perspectives, scientific or social point of view. And that's where this other thing is important. So these are kind of, in a sense, two kind of practical or empirical ways of looking at situations. And then we can come to this question of, well, the kind of the big questions about kind of the whys. And that's what I wanted to end today with, because it's kind of a menu, right? So maybe we can start first with the anthropology part here, and turn off the share screen and come back to you guys. So, if the basic point that Graeber had was that kind of these idealized theories about human nature, are going to be a little bit too simple. Maybe you can point to some of the examples that he was looking at, that he called out, that, or from what you've been just skimming through, what you think could be interesting as examples that we should look at. We should think about different ways of organizing people. So, in particular, having to do with trade. I'm looking at this down here myself. Share again. I'll hit this. I'll go share. This is what I'm looking at. Can you all see this? So if he was talking about here, basically we're talking about money and trade. I know later on in the semester we'll be looking at money as a special case, as a particular kind of infrastructure. But if you want, before we start this, looking at this kind of anthropological example, maybe we can first talk from our present condition. When we talk about money, let's go back to this. Okay, now you've seen it, and then go back to us. When we talk about money from our point of view, okay, as an example, what do we use money for? And what's kind of the usual history of money? What do we use money for, typically? Or how do we use money?
As an exchange and storing value, usually, right?
Yes. Okay. So as a means of exchange. So to conduct exchange or to store value, right? We can also use it to kind of count for how much value something is. Like you put a price on something, like dollars per hour, right? And then what about before cryptocurrencies and pandemic made us all go to kind of cashless or touchless money, right, forms of money. What's the usual story about how money got started? If you go back, there must have been a time before money, right? So usually when people talk about that, what preceded it? What would you say? Before we had money, what did people do, you think?
I'd say probably just like simple trade, just bartering item for item, not necessarily money.
That's the word for it. Why do people say, in the usual kind of economic myth, okay, let's say right away, say, then why did money get invented? What was the advance, in terms of infrastructure now, financial infrastructure? When money was invented, what was its value? What was the big plus?
Could you repeat the question, please?
Sorry, say, just saying, what's the big plus advantage of having money versus bartering?
Oh, it weighs a lot less than a goat or something like that, right?
That's for sure, right? I mean, also, like, suppose what I have is, I have a bunch of shoes, I have a bunch of shirts, right? I don't know, what can I do? I can probably, I teach somebody to read, let's say. I mean, I can offer that as a service, a bunch of stuff. I don't have a lot, I may have certain skills. And everybody has certain kinds of stuff, objects and skills. But, and I need to eat, carrots, drink water, drive a car, right? If you imagine this is all done by barter, and I'm working with you all here in this class, right? I need some gasoline. Do any of you have some spare gas you can just give me to put in my car? I mean, maybe, but I don't think so. Okay. Or I don't know, right? I mean, like, I suppose I need some. So barter is a very cumbersome way to run an economy. Money has this infinite exchangeability power, right? In theory, you can exchange anything for cash or money. Let's put it as money and back again. So that's a very powerful aspect of money. This is a usual theory, okay? in this paragraph, in these paragraphs of great David Graeber, okay, underneath, that's one of the things he's talking about here. I wish I had page markings here. There's some comments he's making about kind of certain theories, like if we move from money to other kinds of economic abstractions like markets. We also had this kind of potted histories of, well, how markets came to be. You know, can you imagine like before, can we imagine, for example, a time before markets? Just speculatively, you know. Well, first of all, what do we use markets for? Markets for?
I think markets are centers of exchange. So money is the means of exchange. Markets are where the place where the exchange happens.
Good way to put it. Okay. And place, of course, nowadays can be virtual, right? Electronic exchange of place. You can have like secondhand goods on even on Amazon, for sure. Now, with the market, usually has this notion of certain things put up for a certain price, and somebody's going to go say, "Well, I'll accept that price and I'll buy from you." Okay. Now, if you look at this story, right, we can ask, well, was there ever a time in our human history when we didn't have markets? Well, I don't know. I mean, presumably, there was a time when we didn't have cars, a time when we didn't have walled cities, and a time when we no longer have walled cities, et cetera, et cetera. So probably for any kind of human invention, there was a time when we didn't have it, okay? Or didn't have it in this kind of this modern form, right? But that's worth looking at in these couple pages where Graeber and his co-author are being very careful to say, look, you know, if you look back in the past at how this is Papua New Guinea, yes, in these island cultures, what people were doing with precious objects. In this case, what was it? Heirloom arm shells and necklaces, which were considered to be very precious and desirable by the people who lived there. And tracking as an anthropologist, their circulation of those objects, how those objects moved around from place to place, from person to person, to not just bring in our present assumptions about how people organize themselves in economies, and just slap it on top of that practice, meaning money and markets. Key thing. And that's what they were kind of criticizing here, that, you know, we could go back there and say, oh, clearly they're trading for utility reasons, you know, to trade so many beads for a canoe or whatever, you know, or for a bride or something, to have this notion, that kind of notion of commodification, but not necessarily. And that's what they're pointing out. So if you look more carefully at reasons why, at least in those areas, people, in this case, there was men who would travel, make dangerous trips or challenging trips from place to place, carrying these precious objects and looking at the circulation of these precious objects. They had other reasons to do so than what could be explained by a market. And you can read it for yourselves. It's actually quite fun to read. Okay. And I'll share with you this page where it talks about there are all sorts of reasons and ways that people circulate trade, circulate practices and objects. And looking at, just to pick a few, they say, well, there are these, for example, dream quests or vision quests. There are traveling healers, people who heal and they travel from place to place, offering services as a healer. Or in this case, there's a certain practice in certain parts of North American indigenous societies of women who like to practice games of chance, gambling. Okay. And this is indigenous practice. I'm not talking about, they're not talking about modern white standard society, conventional societies in post-Columbian times. We're talking about indigenous practices. Okay. You can read it for yourselves. All right. So that's just to get some ground, some texture. Okay. And then throughout the seminar, throughout this course, part of the a part of what helps could be whenever we're looking at some questions, such which might seem abstract, is to always bring it back to earth, I think, to look at concrete examples, right? We can pick up concrete examples from our own lives, from our own experience, but what David Graeber provides is concrete examples from other cultures and other times, okay? And he writes it in a very nice way, so why not? Okay, quick, 2-minute, 3-minute introduction to Graeber, all right? And hopefully you go after that and look at it yourselves. Now, this other work by Alan, I'll give introduction, Alan Hoekstra, this other work, they are very different people. They were scientists. They are scientists who work with forests. They work for the United States Forestry Service. And over many decades, they developed a few ways of thinking about trees, forests as ecologies, as ecosystems, rather than just as natural resource or as a park for people to go visit. And they began to they wrote this amazing book, Toward a Unified Ecology, I think. Oh, this is it. Okay. Toward a Unified Ecology. And most of this book is really about ecology. Okay, it's about organisms, biomes, populations, ecosystems, et cetera, full of diagrams and pictures. It's really amazing book, actually. It's a really amazing book. But I just chose a story that they had near the end. They include scientists and policymakers inside their theory. In other words, not just look at how plants and animals work together, but also how do they themselves, as forestry managers and government people and scientists, how do they fit inside this ecosystem? Which is pretty interesting, right? You usually think, well, I am an ecologist and these creatures and trees are somewhere else and I study them. But if I include myself in the ecosystem, how do I do that? Okay. And then they talked about a forest. Let me ask you, okay, suppose you're a forestry manager and you're supposed to assess the health, the status of the forest. I'm speaking to you from Montreal, Canada. Have any of you read about the news about the fires in Canada? Heard about that? Okay. Okay. In the Southwest, I'll be back in Phoenix soon. There's a whole different story about heat domes. Okay. But maybe you read about, I don't know, I think it's about a month ago, New York City had world's worst pollution on that day because of all the smoke that came from Canada. There were, or maybe now it's not something, about 1,000 fires in Canada, about half of which were out of control, officially out of control. So you look at the fire map, smoke map in Canada, it's pretty terrifying, actually. So, and there's this kind of smoke coming from all these hundreds of dots, and it's being pumping more and more smoke into the air. And even in Montreal, which is hundreds of miles away from some of those big fires in the north of Canada, the sky was orange. And I remember looking out there, the sky was totally orange. And you could barely see the sun full day in the middle of the day. And Montreal had the record for the world's most polluted city on the planet on that day. The worst of it. Okay, so it's not a trivial matter. Okay, it's forest management. So if you are forest managers, okay, and you're supposed to assess that infrastructure, it's called an infrastructure, resource, how it's being managed or how it's being run, what were some of the things you want to look at, observe, measure?
I think I would want to take like new growths into consider like the number of new trees growing, because eventually the trees won't last forever. So I think already be thinking about what the life cycle of these trees are, considering the life cycle of existing trees, trying to date them to say, okay, these trees typically would start to wither out or die out after maybe when they are 120 years. That means that somehow there should already be trees in the pipeline so that the forest or that particular ecosystem remains. So I think trying to figure out how to not just preserve, because if you're just preserving, what happens when what you're preserving expires? And I think that in some cases, some things literally expire naturally, even without outside agents coming in. It will die. So I think a part of conservation, actually, there's a part of conservation that requires active input to maintain that ecosystem. Yeah.
Perfect. I know this will also add to that what species of trees. Let's keep going. What else? What other features do we want to look at?
I would want to look at. Oh, go ahead.
I just say, well, I guess depending on kind of what goals of forest management are, but ecological diversity in general beyond species of trees.
Okay, and Chris?
I would want to look at as specifically as a forest manager, I would want to look at how many people are going to be visiting the place that I'm managing, or like if I can't get a number on that, like the relative population around it, because I want to make sure the infrastructure around the forest is going to be able to sustain that we have enough nodes of infrastructure to make it more convenient for people to like take care of the forest rather than neglect the forest, you know.
Okay, and different kinds of people, meaning people who are going there just to be as tourists, people going there to extract resources, people who are there to live, so that just fans out into a lot. But that's already gives us a little tip as to what they're going to be pointing to in just a second. How about the rest of you? Some other factors to look at?
Kind of building off that, looking at like the external infrastructures that would impact the forest that I'm managing, like what could have like dire effects on that area.
Like what?
Like city pollution or waste and like stuff like that could have negative effects on like the ecosystem.
Yeah. Super. That's great. Any others? Just as a quick list. Sounds good.
Sure, I'd like to look at like, I don't know, data and numbers like rainfall, for example, or the number of sunny days, things like that.
Okay. Environmental data. Great. Super. Good. Now I'm going to show you. Okay, so being professional foresters and ecosystems like scientists, et cetera, they came up with a bunch of these kinds of criteria. It's all good. All right. Then they talked to let me find it first. Right. They talked to a very well-known social scientist. I can't remember his name. It's in the text. Okay. And just in a short time, this fellow came up with a whole bunch of other factors that these people had never considered. And here they are. I'm going to magnify it and take a look. So there were social structure indicators, and then there were social process indicators. And they give some of them. I'll try to, here. Now, can you all see them? It's pretty big, right? All right. So for example, number 3 is the population age distribution among smaller communities stable, becoming older, or becoming younger? Is the number of locally owned businesses stable or increasing? Is the travel distance to basic goods and services stable or increasing? Yeah. At the very bottom, do non-governmental organizations provide a stable or expanding suite of services to the population of the ecological system management unit? The ecological system management is a jargon term for not just the trees, the forest, but also all the creatures, all the watersheds, the road systems, where the towns are, all fitting together into a single management unit. Okay, so this is the structure part. And then if you look down here, next page, process means change, how things change. Okay, so let's see. Number 3, is a net capital monetary inflow stable or increasing? Even kind of more aspirational things, like, are people's expectations regarding the future of the communities being met? Right? If people say, oh, I wish, and then 2 years later, it's not there, what's going to happen to how people feel? Like, do they want to stay there, or do their kids want to stay there or not? The very, very concrete thing, and economic things too, is the ratio of property value to local income stable. And this is a big issue, not just there, right, but anywhere, right? The cost of renting or buying a home. And also informatics stuff. So I think several of you are becoming, adept in IT technologies. Is there an increasing flow of information between local communities and their context beyond the community, ecological system management? That's right. And when we say flow of information, that can break out into all sorts of things. All right, that's nice to look at. Okay, and I propose that we do this throughout the semester. If we start thinking about infrastructures, and this comes back to the Edwards paper from the first week, thinking about the social dimension, obviously, of these systems, right? No surprises there. But these questions are really concrete. So maybe some of the questions can even be ported over to some other context. Any comments so far before we move to the?
Yeah, just one thought. I guess as we're talking about this, I hadn't really made the connection before, but the book, just got up to get it. The Mushroom at the End of the World is coming to mind. And it's a kind of long account by also an anthropologist, Anna Tsing, who writes about kind of like the ecological and social connections of mushroom foraging in Oregon and also in, I think, Japan. And I think it's a really interesting, like, very, very deep case study on why both social measures and ecological measures are really critical for, like, thinking about how things arise from things that are broken. And I feel like this is now feeling very strongly connected to some of these readings this week.
It's a beautiful book.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad you brought this up. Maybe if you don't mind, just send a post in discussions, so link, reference to that. That'd be really, really great.
Yeah.
And if you see the line from it, also post a link to it too. Thanks so much. And what Leah just said about how things arise from things that are broken, and like how mushrooms arise from what we think of as waste, right, or dirt or muck or whatever. It's a very interesting metabolic idea that I think I totally agree. I think we can think about transplanting that idea to all these other situations too. Yeah, for sure. Instead of just a simple mechanical closed loop economy, the way people talk about it from an engineering perspective, which is good, how to enrich that with this kind of thinking, I think it's really deep. Thank you. So in fact, that takes us, in fact, as a segue to the main point of the week about Jim Bendell. Have any of you had a chance to look at Jim Bendell's work so far this week? I'll say a little bit about Jim, what I know. Okay, I only know from what I read here. So Bendell had a long career already in sustainability and business, and sustainability and sustainability science, with applications in policy and business. Okay, so then we started looking at it seriously, like all the literature to that point some years ago about all the different ways we can avoid or mitigate climate change and all sorts of impacts they would have on business and economics, etc. And his conclusion was that very likely we won't be able to avoid civilization challenging changes. So it's very likely. but the way that the professionals in the field of sustainability, this is the critique part, the way that the professionals in the field of sustainability talk, or even the IPCC reports that say for climate change, it's always saying, if people live up to their promises, meaning governments, let's say, nations, right? And certain industry sectors live up to what they say they will do, then. But in reality, that's not what happens, right? So if you want to be realistic, we need to accept the possibility, the high probability that there will be civilization challenging changes. But that's not the end of the story. And then what? And that's what this is about. This deep adaptation article is about. In this course, there are two articles that are very, very challenging, I think, if you take it seriously, that's enough. One is this one, Jim Bendel, on deep adaptation. And the other one is at near the end of the course. It's called 4 degree. So instead of, everybody's read about 1.5, 1.5. I try to, not break the 1.5 degree. First of all, it's just a number. It's one global number. So, there's so many things that can happen, right, underneath that one global measure that we can and we should pay attention to. But the 4 degree article was written by some law professors. We're talking about how if we look at all the processes that are happening, it's quite possible that we will greatly break that 1.5 cap. There's no reason why we expect it to stay under it. So we might as well start thinking ahead of time about what kinds of governance we would like to have. What forms of government, what forms of organizing ourselves, what ways that we can live together that we want to have that still honor some of the most essential values that we hold. Okay. Coming back to this Jen Bendel article, that's what the exercise is about. What he's been doing around the world with this deep adaptation movement or exercise is to go to different communities in different places around the world and ask these 3 questions that I'm asking for this week. Okay, I'll just say it verbally and we can talk. First one is 3 R's. First one is what are our norms, values that we hold, the ways of living, technologies, even techniques that we really want to retain. What do we want to retain, even in the face of massive changes in the environment? Okay, what do we want to hold on to? Second question is what are those values, norms, ways of living, techniques and technologies that we really should, we're willing to relinquish? Okay. And thirdly, what are the values and ways of living that we no longer do in modern times? Okay, that maybe we should recuperate. Okay. So let's take the first question. Let's open it up. Okay. So and of course there's no one right answer to any of this, right? And there's going to be a diversity, plurality of what we each think. But I propose to ask each of you, in turn, to say something about this, and then think about it from kind of a combination of your own perspective, but always, of course, situated inside some sort of, more collective field. Because none of these are going to be things that we can tackle by oneself. That doesn't make sense, right? So let's start.
I would say maybe one thing we shouldn't let go of is communal living. So I'm Nigerian, and because I'm schooling in America, I shuttle between Lagos, Nigeria, where I live, and Tempe. And one indicator of how different a society I was in was just how much people kept to themselves. So generally, I would say that face value, people I've encountered in America are really nice people, but then striking connections is harder, right? And it can just be that, we're different people, socialize differently. But being raised Nigerian, you don't necessarily have to know anybody to strike a conversation or connection with them. It can be as simple as, oh, there's this type of fabric I want to buy. And the other person is like, me too. And the next person sitting beside you is like, oh, I have someone who sells this kind of fabric. And you've literally created something. And without having to think too much, right? Your neighbors, I mean, this isn't true of a city like Lagos. Lagos has 20 million people. So, but I wasn't raised in Lagos. Where I was raised in Nigeria was in a much smaller city with like, I don't know, maybe 1 million people or something. And everybody knew everybody. At every point in time, my mother could tell where I was, not necessarily because she knew where I was, but because someone would call her and be like, oh, I just saw your daughter. And it used to annoy me growing up because I'm like, why are you constantly reporting me to my mother? What? Why? And I would never forget an instance where I was going home with a friend who happened to be a boy, and people called me, whether like, your daughter is going home with a boy. Do you know she's with a boy? And my mom was like, yes, she told me. But then moving to Lagos, which is still in Nigeria, and it was Christmas, and it wasn't, it almost didn't mean anything. But where I was raised in Nigeria, festivals mean something. So whether it's Muslim festivals or Christian festivals or just wedding ceremonies, people would come to your house, they would bring you food. Some people would just come to your house and sit down, wait for you to serve them and taste the food and be like, don't really like this one. I want the other one. And they are not scared. They don't feel like they are imposing on you. That's just normal. So spending Christmas for the first time in my life without me having to cook, because you cook a feast and then you go give to people, and then people bring theirs to you as well. And then I couldn't believe it. And it dawned on me that I didn't even know my neighbor. Like I had literally never seen my neighbor face to face. The only thing I would say is like, I'll peep out the window, I'll see somebody's car. Next time I peep out, there'll be no car anymore. So that sense of community, I think that in a bid to thrive as individuals, we may have maybe overcorrected. There are ways in which community can stifle you. But I think that in many ways, except in like extreme circumstances, community is a net positive. There's a kind of grounding it gives you, knowing that people are there for you. They may not be related to you or anything, but there's something about knowing that I can knock on my neighbor's door and be like, I'm bored, and sit down and be like, I'm hungry, and eat, and it's not an intrusion. So yeah.
It's very, very interesting what you're saying. There's also some of the why I think it's really great to have plurality of responses is because it's not like there's one past and one future. There are ways of living together that currently exist that are really, really different. And these stories maybe we can use to inform how we design futures in other places. And when I was married to an Italian for a long time, 20 years. And I remember in Italy, in northern Italy, people would just drop by, friends, okay, not strangers, but friends would just drop by without calling, or even just come by on a bicycle and just say, hey, just shout up and then open up. This is not villages, these are just towns, okay? And then if we're in, we open the door and they come in and they have something to eat and go on. But back in California, where I went to school, grad school, we never did that. Even the best friends would always make an appointment to go over to see somebody else. And they say, well, because you might not be home, right? It's not that we were far away, we could just bicycle over. But still, this idea that you have to make an appointment to do something together was something really different for the Italian friends and family that I was with. Same period. And they're kind of roughly same socioeconomic class. Okay, interesting. All right, sorry, spoke too long. Somebody else, another set of norms, values to keep.
Specifically for America or the United States, sorry. I think an aspect I would like to keep would be freedom of speech, and moreover, the ability or expectation that we all hate our government. Really, it seems like an almost unique thing. I've been around and I've talked to a lot of people from around the world, and it seems like it's almost like a unique identifier of Americans that we all just like hate our officials, and we have the right to like disagree with anything that they do. So I would really like to keep that as an aspect of culture.
Keep going. Who else? Somebody else.
One thing I think that we should try to at least make an effort to um, retain is just more uh, the very open nature of communication and collaboration through online uh, talking with other people. So for things like online work or collaborations, like if you're working on a project or something, of course you can talk with other members of the group that you're in and work it out, in the real world. But you can also, we now have the means of doing all that stuff online on the internet. And so I think, and even going beyond that, if you have maybe for instance like an issue with the product or something that you ordered online, you can of course try to look for the solution yourself, or even maybe try to get in contact with the company of the product. So I think just having that that very expanded sense of flexibility in terms of how you communicate and work with others is something that we should try to retain.
Let's keep going. Let's name everything. Everybody else?
I think we should maintain the kind of open, let's say like various systems for gathering and sharing knowledge openly, and for maintaining and kind of allowing for the continuous evolving of various cultural artifacts, literature, arts, etc.
Kind of a cultural memory, maintain cultural memory. I think it's yeah. Okay. It's memory. Okay. Yeah, profound. And then Sam.
Yeah, I'm kind of thinking along the lines of like, I want to hold on to like the value of making something and creating something. Obviously, it goes with like art and music and poetry and that type of stuff, but not in the way that like promotes overconsumption, because we have a real issue with that in the United States. So I'm trying to figure out, because there is that special relationship that evolves when the maker creates something and has that relationship with the object, and then it also brings that out into the world, and that has a special relationship with like the object and the user. But not, I'm trying to think like, just because there is so much that is constantly being created and made, but more in a sense of like culturally and more meaningful value to it.
Yeah. I think, being in Haida, Herberger Arts and Design, this has a lot of resonance. I think it does have a lot of resonance. I'm happy to hear that. I mean, I think a lot of these things that people have raised, when you write about it, maybe you can elaborate a little bit more. Like in this case, when talking about making, we can make a concrete thing, an object, a tangible thing, or we can make an event like a performance, or we can sing a song instead of recording and playing back a song, right? The difference between the two. Or we can make a piece of knowledge, connecting that with Cameron. We can make a piece of knowledge, versus recording and transmitting a piece of knowledge. So different activities. So yeah, okay, keep this in mind. I'm missing somebody. Nolan, did you have a chance?
Yeah, sure. I think something that would be retained by humans in any circumstance, maybe for better or worse, is comfort. Comfort is part of human nature, and we're always going to have the desire to do things the easiest and simplest way, or have things close to us that bring us comfort. So I think that would always be something retained, no matter what.
It's a nice way to think about transversally across these different kinds of needs. And Chieko, welcome. I won't put you on the spot, but what we're talking about right now is going through the three basic questions from Bendel's piece, what we want to retain, what values we want to retain. And next question is what do we think we should relinquish? And I know we're kind of running short on time, but I'd like to give people a chance to speak to that. Okay, right now in a minute. It's what kinds of practices and norms we think that we should relinquish. And they can be quite different. So whoever wants to speak up, please speak up.
I'm kind of going in the same direction as Nolan. I think we might need to relinquish the desire for comfort as a culture. I don't think it's very sustainable on a global scale. I think sacrificing like large swaths of the environment so that people can live comfortably and have interesting vacation spots, I don't think that's sustainable at all.
So now we have a debate.
I do agree with him though that it's a matter of human nature to always want to live more comfortably. I don't disagree with that.
Yeah, but then if we want to relinquish desire for comfort, maybe this is nice because then we can start thinking about, yeah, exactly as Chieko's putting into the chat here, comfort versus idolization of leisure. Distinction between, we can maybe sort it out later, or you guys can sort it out in discussion, is what do you guys mean by comfort? Okay, and also how is comfort achieved? Because there are all these different ways. We can achieve comfort by consumption. We can achieve comfort by making. We can achieve comfort maybe with other people's comfort, or we can achieve comfort at the expense of other people's comfort, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so that's for discussion. Somebody else, another kind of norm, practice?
Yeah, I don't think I added anything to what we should keep. But I have, thoughts on what we can relinquish or at least redefine, which the thing that comes to mind for me is like deeply changing our relationship to property, like what ownership means. And like I think that we can get rid of what it means like in this world. I think that doesn't necessarily mean we need to get rid of having things that are ours or like we are intimately connected to, but yeah.
That's a really great proposition, and I think we'll just spend the rest of the few minutes on that, say a few words about that. It's worth looking at the history of property, at least in the English American law, and you just go Google it as during this week. It's quite interesting. There's actually there's a lot of junk. Okay, so be careful. But there are some interesting histories of that go back to the enclosure of land in England. This will go back to, I'm guessing around before 1500. Okay, so way before that, maybe 1300. With the beginning of the enclosure of forests that theoretically all belong to the king, okay? But in practice, people just go in there, hunt and pick and forage and take whatever they need for subsistence, okay? But at some point, there began to be more formally the notion that certain representatives of the sovereign could regulate what people could go in there and what could they do in a given forest. So this is the beginning of the notion of enclosure of land. and property goes back to this period. It's very interesting. It's very fascinating. So the notion of property itself is not universal and wasn't always there. And so it's fairly modern in history, in human history. This kind of legal notion of property is fairly modern, at least under English law. So something to look at, all right? And so, and there's something underneath too to look at too, which is different from being personal. Like it's, you know, my family, my pencil, or whatever. It's different. It can be separate, or my creation can be separate from that kind of legal notion definition of property and notion of property owner. And then we know that from the history of colonization, right? When the Europeans came, there are these famous stories, right, about Europeans exchanging like deeds or things for land. That indigenous people didn't have the concept of property, that kind of notion of property, that there was such a thing as a legal right to property that could be exchanged for something else. This notion was important. Okay. So it's very interesting because you have two radically different worldviews and different knowledge systems, epistemic systems that just were not commensurate, right? So one side was thinking that they were buying rights to property, and the other side didn't even have a notion of land as property. Didn't even have that notion. So how can you have a contract when these two epistemic regimes have no commensurability at all, right? It goes all the way down to the present day with the question of indigenous rights and reservations in the United States, right? Stuff like that. So yeah, great to know that. So I'm looking forward to what you have to say in the discussions. Please just continue this in discussion, all right? And we'll wrap it up on Friday. Okay. Hope that was useful, and I'll see you next week. Okay, bye everybody. I'll share the recording with class. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.